Title: The Name Buried in Salt. Year: 225 million. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. There's a desert where salt falls like snow. It buries, preserves, silences. And beneath one of its countless dunes lies a name, the name buried in salt, spoken only once in every generation by those brave enough to remember. This time it was Amara, born to scribes but raised by silence. She had never heard her family's full story, only fragments, filtered through careful glances and halted words. But the salt whispered to her in dreams. It told her of a truth buried to keep peace, a lie wrapped in honor. And one morning she walked into the dunes to dig it up. She carried no map, only a tear catcher, an ancient device used to measure grief. Each drop a memory, each memory a compass. The elders watched her go with pity. She'll learn, they said. They were wrong. She would teach. Chapter 2. The tear catcher filled faster than expected. Each step uncovered sorrow. A war erased from tablets. Betrayal refrained a sacrifice. A hero who wasn't. The name came closer with every drop, heavy, sacred, condemned. Mira's dreams blurred into waking. She saw the figure now, cloaked in morning salt, face hidden, voice calm. You came to unbury me, it asked. I came to know the truth. Then you will lose peace. Mira pressed forward. In the ruins of an old monument, half swallowed by dunes, to uncover the truth. Her ancestor had not died a martyr, but a traitor to war, executed for revealing a peace plan before its time. His name had been erased not for shame, but to protect the lie of noble bloodlines. She wept, not in shame, but release. The tear catcher glowed. She knew what she had to do. Chapter 3. Returning was harder than leaving. She walked through the streets with the tear catcher in hand, glowing with every step. Whispers rose like dust behind her. Some cursed her name, others washed in silence. One child reached out to touch the device, and wept without knowing why. Mira stood in the circle of record, where truths became law. She placed the tear catcher on the stone dais. I bring a name, she said, and with it a choice. Elders tried to silence her, but the catcher spoke now, its tears projected into light. Scenes from the past played out for all to see. Gasps, cries, realizations. In silence, at last, one elder bowed. The lie brought order, but the truth brings us peace. A vote was cast. The name restored. Mira did not stay. She returned to the salt, where she built a shrine not to worship, but to witness. Struggle doesn't weaken you. It forges the shape of your becoming. Title: The False Healer. Year: 224,350,973.8. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Oral rested between rivers, one clear, one clouded. The people lived according to which water they drank. The clear river dwellers lived in stone houses, wore iron keys around their necks, and spoke of tradition. The clouded river folk lived in tents, healed with herbs, and told stories the wind carried. It was said the clear river gave truth, the clouded gave lies. No one crossed until the false healer arrived. She claimed to heal, yet no records proved her training. She spoke gently, asked many questions, and never took payment. Her cures worked, though she offered no explanations. To the clear river folk she was a fraud. To the clouded, a miracle. In secret, she visited the old ruins at the town's edge, and there she found him, a forgotten librarian. He dusted books that no longer had pages, preserved scrolls no one wanted. He looked up. "The lake," he said. "I was told you might help me," she answered. "I might." Chapter 2. They met each dusk among the ruins. The healer brought stories of those. She helped both sides of the river. The librarian brought questions. Together they unearthed forgotten texts, revealing a time when the town was one, the rivers not yet divided. "The truth is older than the divide," he said. "And harder to carry," she replied. When a child from the clear river side fell ill, the town physician failed. Desperate, the parents sought the false healer in secret. She cured the child with a tea of twilight thistle. Rumors spread. Lines blurred. The town council declared her a danger. "You're undoing centuries of protection," they accused. "No," she said. "I'm undoing centuries of fear." That night, someone set fire to her tent. She didn't rebuild. Instead, she moved into the ruins with the librarian, and the books began to sing. Chapter 3. The town changed, not all at once, but in whispers. The rivers remained, but paths began to form between them. Children played on both shores. Stories were traded like seeds, and in the center of it all, the ruins bloomed. The healer no longer hid. The librarian opened a lending circle, not of books, but of memories. People came to speak, to remember, to cry, to learn. At the annual gathering, the town invited both to speak. The healer held no speech. She only said, "What you shield defines what you fear to lose." And then she held out her hand across the violet crowd. A council member once her accuser stood and took it. Barriers fell without a sound. In the ruins, now hollow, the rivers met in an underground stream always had, the librarian claimed. All that divided them was fear. And fear, once named, has no more power. They were never just healer and librarian. They were bridge and memory, and they were never forgotten again. Title: Primordial Pulse. Year: 223,717,948. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The wandering monk carried no scriptures, only empty journals. He walked the ruins of Empathion, once a sanctuary of emotional wisdom, now a city built of silence. The city banned tears decades ago, declared grief a malfunction, joy was rationed, empathy punished. He had lived beyond the borders once, in the forests where feelings were still allowed to bloom, but the whispering constellation called him back, a code emitted in the sky, flickering like forgotten lullabies. He entered Empathion's court during a curfew storm, watched as faces passed with blank eyes, dragging chains of varied pain behind them. Storms do not break you, he whispered to no one. They whisper the shape of your next becoming. And he began to write. Chapter 2. The journals were not diaries, they were mirrors. He left them on benches in food queues, under flickering lights. People began to write. At first nonsense, then truth. A child drew her fear of the dark. A nurse etched her loneliness in tears. An engineer wrote a single word: help. The city stirred. The whispering constellation grew brighter, reacting, maybe remembering. The Council of Rational Order tried to confiscate the journals, but they multiplied. The monk was arrested, but every wall of his cell filled with writings, and when he slept, the walls whispered them back. He smiled, not because he was safe, but because the city was no longer silent. Chapter 3. Empathy and craft. First through song, then weeping, then laughter, sharp and sudden like broken glass catching sunlight. The whispering constellation aligned over the city's heart. Lights formed a map. To what? No one knew, but people followed. The monk was released, not as a prisoner, but as a guide. He walked at the center of a growing tide of voices, and beneath the fractured sky, they didn't build statues. They built gardens, where feelings were taught like language, and silence became sacred not as suppression, but as the breath between truths. Because even in dystopia, a whisper can become a storm, and reshape the soul of a city. Title: The Laughing Flame. Year: 223,076,922.5. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city of Kindrel, fire was sacred. Each district had its own flame eternal, protected, revered. The grandest of them all was the flame of identity, housed in a stone sanctuary and guarded by tradition older than memory. No one touched it. No one questioned it. Until it flickered, the priests panicked. Engineers recalibrated the vents. Scholars argued over metaphors. But it was a young Aaron, runner named Ryan, who first noticed what no one else did. The flame responded to kindness. He had given his scarf to a coughing elder by the sanctuary steps. The flame had pulse. Not brighter, not higher, but warmer. He told his sister, a cartographer's apprentice. She laughed. And maybe it's laughing with you. And so the sacred rumor spread. That kindness fed the flame. The priest scoffed. But people tried anyway, and the laughing flame was born. Chapter 2. Ryan became a symbol, though he never saw it. Each day, someone new tried a gesture. Bread shared, arguments forgiven, names remembered. Each time, the flame shimmered, not always visible, but felt. The city changed. Alleys once feared became markets of mutual aid. Artists painted murals of smiling strangers. Children carried small lanterns and told each other, "It listens when you care." But not all welcomed the shift. The faction known as the Emberbar, defenders of the flame's purity, denounced the movement. Faith cannot be reduced to feelings, they warn. Kindness is not doctrine. One night, the sanctuary was sealed. No entry, no offerings, no flame. The city darkened not in light, but in spirit. Ryan stood outside its gates and lit a match. Just one. He cupped it in his hands. "Sacred," he whispered, his breathing quietly in your most honest breath. Others gathered, one by one. They lit their own flames, small, honest, unstoppable. Chapter 3. The sanctuary remained locked, but outside thousands of lights danced, not in protest but in promise. The Ember Guard watched, unsure. They expected anger. Instead, they saw kindness multiplied. The guard dropped their torch and joined the crowd. Then another, and another. Inside, the original flame roared back to life without spark, without touch, as if answering joy. The gates opened, but no one rushed in. They simply stood, honoring both fire and each other. Ryan placed his small flame beside the great one. It didn't vanish. It merged. The priests approached. "What are you?" one asked. Ryan smiled. Just someone who paid attention. The laughing flame flickered once, twice, then settled. From that day, the flame of identity was no longer guarded. It was shared. And the sea remembered. The sacred you seek is breathing quietly in your most honest breath. And every breath, if kind, was now part of the eternal fire. Tidal, primordial pulse. Year 222,435,897. Year, primordial pulse. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The masked midwife of becoming never spoke of her past. She wore a veil spun from dream, thread, and wandered the broken lands with one hand always free, never clenched, never armed. One war came to the edge of the hollow womb valley. She did not flee. She knocked at every door and whispered, "The lie that keeps you safe is the one that keeps you small." Then she stayed. She stood between blades and children, between silence and truth. She gave no grand speeches, only presence, a defiant, gentle breath in a world that had forgotten how to exhale. Chapter 2. Legends say she had no magic, that her power came from listening so deeply. Wounds unraveled just to tell her their names. When the invaders stormed the lowlands, they found her waiting beside a boy who stuttered, a woman with no name, and a giant with one eye closed forever in grief. They fought not with swords, but with stories. Truths shouted from rooftops, songs born from pain. One of the invaders fell to his knees. He'd seen her in a dream. She handed him a key. He never knew what it opened, only that his hand trembled to hold it. Chapter 3. After the war, no one crowned her. No statues were raised, but the valley grew quiet, peaceful. Strangers arrived not to conquer, but to learn the old lullabies carved into stone. The masked midwife vanished one night under a sky full of new constellations. Only the key without a door remained. Palm on a tree where children gathered, to dream, to remember, to stand, and beneath the fractured sky, they whispered to each other not how she saved them, but how they saved each other, and how small lies, when let go, give room for truth to bloom. Title, The Shadow Twin. Year 221,794,871.2. Year, primordial pulse. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The war between Elbreth and Charon had lasted 3 generations. Not over land, not over faith, but over a banner and ensign stitched into cloth and paraded at the treaty's collapse. Since then, blood had soaked fields where crops once grew. In the border village of Drenmore, a child was born beneath an eclipse. His mother called him Aaron. His father, a deserter, called him Cursed. He grew quiet, strong, unnoticed. By 16, he wore no colors, swore no oath, fought for no crown, and yet he ended fights. He stood between feuds, asking only one question: will this feed your children? They called him the Bannerless Knight. And when the Shadow Twin arrived, a masked emissary from Elbrath's lost archives, Aaron was waiting. "You were supposed to be met," the twin said, "and you were supposed to be dead," Aaron replied, and neither flinched, for they had both walked away from borders that would have cost the world its soul. Chapter 2. The Shadow Twin carried ancient texts, proof that the war had been engineered, not ignited. Old kings silenced dissent through staged insults. The banner? A forgery, a distraction. Aaron read it all slowly, then burned it. "Proof won't matter," he said, "not unless they feel it." So they made a plan not of swords, but of theater. Together they staged a duel at the fallen bridge of Erith Vale, where it spread like fire. 2 legends would clash. Crowds from both nations gathered. The battle began, but not with blades, with questions. Aaron struck first with memory. "What did your father lose in this war?" he shouted to the crowd. The twin parried with grief. "What name do you whisper when you bury your kin?" Their weapons, honesty, regret, hope. By dusk no blood had been spilled, but tears watered the broken stones. Even if fleeting wind carves eternal echoes into the soul. Chapter 3. The leaders tried to discredit them, but too many had watched, and even more had felt something shift. Aaron and the twin disappeared that night, not in fear, but in fulfillment. Their work wasn't to be seen, it was to seed. Months later, border patrols were half. Traders crossed with fewer checks. Children began to learn each other's songs. In a clearing where the bridge once stood, flowers bloomed wild and unclaimed. No banners, only footprints. Some say the bannerless knight became a farmer. Others say he took no name, only causes. The Shadow Twin, rumor says they walk cloaked in dusk, listening for silence that needs breaking. But wherever they went, the memory lingered, and so it was taught. Even if fleeting wind carves eternal echoes into the soul, and peace begins not with treaties, but with the courage to see an enemy as someone's son, someone's daughter, someone worth the story continuing. Title, Primordial Pulse. Year 721,153,146. Era. Primordial Pulse. Author Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They found the name buried in salt, wrapped in bandages, face hidden, eyes closed. Once he'd been a tyrant, then he disappeared. Now he woke gifted with empathy, cursed with memory. Every scream he'd ignored he now felt. Every life ruined under his watch played like a song he couldn't unhear. He could feel the ache of strangers just by looking at them. You can never truly know someone until you walk in their shoes, said the woman who saved him. So he wore theirs, all of theirs, and began to walk. Chapter 2. The streets whispered of him like a ghost. He never fought villains with fists, only kindness. When a thief was caught, he brought them food. When a child screamed at night, he stood under their window until sleep returned. People called him soft, then strong, then sacred. No mask, no cape, just silence, salt, and eyes that never looked away. The survivor of ruin, they called him. But he was never surviving. He was rebuilding, one forgiven mistake at a time. Chapter 3. His true name remained hidden, even when his deeds painted murals across broken buildings. One day a mob came for him, afraid his compassion was some new kind of control. He knelt before them, took off his shoes, said nothing. They saw the blisters, the wounds, the hundreds of steps taken not for glory but for them. The mob became a crowd. The crowd became a vigil, and under the fractured sky, no one asked who he'd been, only who they would choose to be now, because justice, they realized, had never worn armor, only empathy, and choose. Title: A Thorn. Lip Scholar. Year 220,512,819.9. Era. Primordial Pulse. Author Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The archives of Arundel were vast, etched not on scrolls but on leaves that only bloomed under moonlight. It was here that Kale, the thorn-lipped scholar, was raised. His lips were scarred from birth, a mark believed to signify a curse or a prophecy. He studied in silence, speaking only when knowledge required a voice. Though his peers mocked his disfigurement, none bested him in thought. Still, he was never chosen for expeditions, never trusted beyond the ink halls. That changed when the shield without allegiance was forged in the age of unmade kings. The shield was a relic of peace, neutral, powerful, unclaimed, and now it was gone. Send Kale, the High Curator said. He knows the histories others fear to read. Gale said nothing. He only bowed, packed a single satchel, and left. The stars above flickered like punctuation marks in a sentence he had yet to write. Chapter 2. Gale traveled through forgotten marshes and jagged ravines, with each setback a torn map, a broken compass, betrayal by a guide. He tasted failure, not as defeat, but as seasoning. He learned to ask better questions. In a village of glass bones, he discovered a trail. In the sunken library of Kyrth, he found fragments of prophecy suggesting the shield had chosen exile rather than theft. It sought not war, but a bearer worthy of peace. One night, Kale faced a mirror of memory, a sentient illusion conjuring his every failure. His first public mistake, his shame before his peers, the kiss he never dared give, the words he swallowed. You are not enough, the mirror said. I never was, Kale replied, but I grow. The mirror cracked, and in its reflection, Kale saw a path. It led to a garden beneath a frozen waterfall, where the shield waited, planted like a seed. Chapter 3. To lift the shield without allegiance, one had to speak no vow. One had to carry no cause. One had to simply be. Gale placed his scarred lips to the shield's surface. I am still growing, he said, and it rose to meet him. He returned to Arundel, not as a hero, but as a reminder that knowledge without humility is a blade with no sheath. The High Curator offered him a chair among the elders. Gale declined. I will teach, but only in the fields, among failure, among hope. And so he walked the world, carrying a shield that protected not kingdoms, but questions. Each child he taught was told the same. Growth reveals just how much more growing waits. And at night, when silence gathered thick, Kale would look to the stars and remember what silence dare not speak. Titled Primordial Pulse. Year 219,871,794. Era. Primordial Pulse. Author Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The mask of many echoes didn't sleep. She couldn't afford to. The city whispered secrets through concrete walls, and she heard them all. People vanished, data bled, and in the silence between footsteps, she wove patterns others couldn't see. Pain hollows you out just wide enough for empathy to take root. She knew this better than anyone, because her life had been pain, and now it was justice, one thread at a time. Chapter 2. Every night, she returned to the wall of names, marked them off one by one, found where the systems failed, where corruption festered. Her fingers bled from too much typing, too many codes cracked. She worked alone. But she wasn't lonely. The voices of the lost guided her. When she uncovered a conspiracy buried beneath layers of city protocol, no one believed her, until one vanished girl came back, wearing a pendant etched with the Widow of Time's seal, survivor's mark. Chapter 3. She didn't stop, even when her face appeared on wanted screens. Even when the drones buzzed her windows, and the networks labeled her a rogue, she simply changed masks, moved forward. Guess truth wasn't a finish line. It was the result of persistence. And beneath the fractured sky, the city began to shift. Not with parades, not with praise, but with fewer names on the wall, or girls walking home, and silence. Finally, where screams once lived, all because one woman refused to stop working. Title: The Architect of Time. Year: 219,230,768.6. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city of Sarntel, time was kept not with clocks, but with stories. Each year, the Architect of Time added a new tale to the archive of becoming a living structure that reshaped itself with every truth spoken. Its halls twisted according to the moral of each chronicle. Its rows formed by the courage it contained. By time it warped. The archive now echoed with contradiction. People walked in circles. Days repeated. Empathy had become taboo, labeled a distraction from order. The architect, now old and weary, sought one last correction. So they summoned the one who returned wrong. Once a historian exiled for feeling too much, he had returned with silence in his eyes and cracks in his voice. But the architect believed in his pain. You remember what the archive forgot, they said. Help me align it. And together, they stepped into the unwritten wing of time. Chapter 2. The unwritten wing had no light, only echo. Each step awakened a memory that hadn't happened yet. They walked through rooms shaped like questions, corridors stitched from regret. And there, hidden beneath a stairwell of shame, they found the missing chronicle, the story of the ones who mattered too much. It told of orphans who spoke kindness into policy, healers who refused to triage based on wealth, builders who paused to ask what their structures destroyed. Each one had been erased for slowing progress. They didn't fit the timeline, the architect murmured. Then the timeline must bend, the historian said. Together, they rewrote the walls, not with ink, but with shared sorrow. The archive trembled and began to weep. Chapter 3. The city awoke to strange architecture. Windows revealed memories. Doors opened to old apologies. Even the sky changed hue when truth was spoken aloud. The people panicked until they noticed something else. Time had aligned. The harvest ripened unto. Children born under fractured constellations found new clarity. And most of all, empathy returned, like breath after drowning. The one who returned wrong addressed the council. I am not here to accuse, only to remind you. Progress without compassion is a spiral, not a path. Some wept, some turned away, but none forgot. The architect of time vanished at night. Some say they became part of the archive itself. Others believe they walked backward into a story long unfinished. Only the historian remained, and when it asked what it all meant, he simply said, truth, when claimed, bends the fabric of time into alignment with your becoming. Then he smiled, and the archive reshaped itself around the sound. Title: Primordial Pulse. Year: 218,589,743. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. A sacred fool woke up in a dumpster again. One step closer to enlightenment, he proclaimed, brushing off cabbage leaves like metals. Society had collapsed, sort of. The vending machines still worked, so people assumed things were fine. But the fool knew better. He saw rot in the roots, cracks behind smiles, and he had a plan. Be ridiculous enough, and maybe they'd listen, or at least pause their scrolling. Chapter 2. He hosted seminars on sidewalks, taught advanced trash whispering and responsibility yoga. Nobody came, except pigeons, but he kept showing up, wrote notes like pick up your own socks, hero, and taped them to mirrors. City workers began secretly collecting them, smiling as they did. Soon, one installed a trash bin in a graffiti rival alley. Another cleaned a bench. They said nothing, but the fool noticed. No movement is wasted if it aligns you closer to your truth. Chapter 3. The mayor called him a public nuisance. The people called him something else. Accountable. The sacred fool didn't lecture. He didn't judge. He just lived absurdly, responsibly, in a world that had forgotten all. And under the fractured sky, things began to shift. Not with revolutions, but with coffee shops using real mugs. With neighbors talking again. Because sometimes, all it takes is one fool brave enough to remind us. The mess is ours to clean, and the laughter too. Title: The Alchemical Fool. Year: 217,948,717.3. Era. Primordial Pulse. Author. Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The City of Vale. It glimmered with alchemical light, towers etched with sigils, streets pulsing with ever-burning braziers. It was a place where history was written daily, often by decree, sometimes by disappearance. In a cluttered corner of the undermarket lived the alchemical fool, a man with more knowledge and sense, and more sense than fear. His potions rarely did what labels claimed, but they always revealed something true. He wore no mask, but painted his face like one half sun, half ash. The authorities dismissed him as harmless. That was their first mistake. When the room keeper arrived quiet, robed in midnight blue, she brought with her a ledger of sealed crimes. Her job, to find where truth had been buried and who had buried it. Her first stop, the fool. "You mock the laws of nature," she said. "I reflect them," he replied. "Laws change. Nature remembers." And so began the unraveling of Vale. Its perfect lies. Chapter 2. The fool and the room keeper formed a strained alliance. She brought questions. He brought gas. Together, they mapped a trail through the forgotten, under layers of the city, ancient vaults filled with written scrolls, names scratched out, crimes inverted. They uncovered the trial of the 9, a scapegoating that had birthed the current regime. Innocents condemned to preserve the illusion of control. Their names had become curses, their families erased. The fool laughed, not from joy, but recognition. "I descended from one of them," he said. "My truth was criminalized before I was born." Why laugh? As truth won't save you. It demands you rise. They took their findings to the Central Archive. It rejected them, not by guards, but by silence. Their records vanished, their voices muted. The city began to forget them. Chapter 3. But history, when unearthed, does not go quietly. Whispers spread. The braziers of Vela flickered. Winds misbehaved. Children dreamt of names their parents had never spoken. The city's own memory rebelled. The room-keeper inscribed the true account across the walls of the tribunal hall. Not in ink, but in alchemical fire, impossible to extinguish. The fool, arrested during the act, stood trial. "I offer no defense," he said. "Only context." The court laughed, but outside the people gathered and read. One by one, they remembered. One by one, they rose. The court dissolved before the verdict was read. The room-keeper vanished, her mission complete. The fool was freed not by law, but by awareness. He reopened his shop. Now, every bottle carried a rune, not of transformation, but of memory. For truth won't save you. It will demand you rise. And the city of Vale finally did. Title: Primordial Pulse. Year: 217,307,692. Era: Primordial Pulse. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. Rel never thought much of mirrors. They reflected what was, not what could be. But the soul, mirror, half rumor, half relic, promised otherwise. It didn't show your face. It showed your potential. And in the heart of the broken city, amid rusted rooftops and vending machine sermons, Rel found it. It didn't glow. It didn't speak. It simply shimmered with quiet invitation. And Rel, uncertain but aching for more, stepped forward. Chapter 2. The reflection was strange. Not older, not different, just unafraid. She saw herself standing up in class, helping a neighbor, apologizing first. Small things, trivial things, but they struck her harder than thunder. She walked home and returned a library book from 6 months ago. She cleaned the alley behind her apartment. She said thank you and meant it. Chase too hard. Even joy will bleed into shadow, but given gently, it begins to bloom. Chapter 3. Others noticed, not the mirror her. They asked her how she changed. She shrugged, unsure how to explain. But soon they were returning books too, gleaning alleys, smiling. The builder of broken time had whispered to her once in a dream, "Fix what you can touch." She hadn't understood then. Now she did. The soul mirror never left her. It didn't need to, because Rel had become what it showed, and under a fractured sky, that was enough to begin the world again.